Today I am here to announce that Judge Charlene Olmedo held David Anthony Burke, who goes by the name David spelled D4vd, to answer for the horrific and barbaric killing of a 14-year-old at the time, Celeste Rivas Hernandez.
That's DA Nathan Hochman out of LA, talking after the conclusion.
The car sat in a Los Angeles tow yard for months, untouched, before anyone opened its front trunk. Inside were the dismembered, decomposed remains of a girl who had not been seen in almost half a year. It would take investigators nearly 3 months just to confirm how she died. The Tesla belonged to David Anthony Burke, a 20-year-old musician who performs under the name D4v. The remains belonged to Celeste Rivas Hernandez, 14 years old, found on September 8, 2025, in a tow yard where his vehicle had been sitting after it broke down.
Celeste Rivas Hernandez, we know her dismembered, decomposed remains were found in a Tesla out in an LA tow yard back in September of 2025. A Tesla allegedly registered to David, and the purpose of this hearing over the last several days was to determine if there is sufficient probable cause, if there is enough evidence to support these charges to go.
That single detail would set off one of the most closely watched preliminary hearings in Los Angeles this year. And this week, a judge decided whether the case had enough behind it to go to trial. A quick recap for anyone just joining this case. Prosecutors allege David and Celeste were in a relationship and that he lured her to his rental home in Los Angeles before killing her there in April of 2025. He faces first-degree murder with special circumstances that could carry the death penalty, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains.
Life to this.
And to be clear, the reason this matters, it not only is potentially going to support the prosecution's narrative that he lured her there to kill her, but it goes to those special circumstances allegations, right? Lying in wait, killing for financial gain, killing a witness.
All right, look, I know
Investigators say he purchased an inflatable pool, chainsaws, a body bag, and heavy-duty laundry bags in the aftermath. Her body turned up dismembered in September. Inside that same Tesla, Burke faces 3 felony counts: first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation of human remains.
We just wrapped up David's preliminary hearing. So this was over the course of several days. This is where the court would decide if there is sufficient evidence for this case to move forward to trial. Remember, he faces murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, unlawful mutilation of human remains charges, all in connection to the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez.
The special circumstances are what make the murder charge eligible for the death penalty: lying in wait, murder for financial gain, and murder of a witness. Over several days, Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman and LAPD Detective Corey Fell walked Judge Charlene Olmedo through a timeline built from thousands of text messages, phone records, and Tesla location data.
We had LAPD Detective Corey Farrell back on the stand, talking about this plethora of text messages between David and Celeste. Thousands of messages. This is something that we were waiting to see. Talked about it on Friday, the images, the text messages. But today, he talked about the conversation leading up to April 23rd, when prosecutors claim David killed Celeste. Talk to me about what those conversations were.
This was so fascinating to me, Jesse, because opposing counsel here, the prosecution and the defense, they're presenting the exact same digital evidence here. They're presenting this same text message conversation between David and Celeste. And based on what these different attorneys are essentially cherry picking from these conversations, we are getting a very different view of what happened between the two of them and what was said the night before Celeste was allegedly killed. Now, first we heard from Beth Silverman, Deputy DA prosecuting this case.
That relationship, according to testimony, began when Celeste was 12 years old and continued through her 13th and 14th years.
Amount of probable cause, and we will eventually prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. It followed the timeline of the interactions between Celeste Rivas Hernandez when she started as a 12-year-old, then a 13-year-old, then a 14-year-old who never got to see her 15th birthday. Because in the intervening time where she had these interactions with Mr. Burke, he engaged in this sexual conduct with a 13-year-old repeatedly, over and over again. This came out in text messages that were presented, in videos and photographs that were presented to the judge that showed this sexual activity. Ms. Silverman,
investigators say she became pregnant and had an abortion in January 2024 when she was still 13, and that Burke had instructed her to take Plan B. Records described in court referenced a scheme he called Operation Awesome, used when she ran away from her family's home in Lake Elsinore. He allegedly discussed marriage and children with her over text, telling her, according to testimony, that having twins would be fine because they wanted 2 kids regardless. The night before she died, the two argued. Prosecutors and the defense presented the same conversation, but each side highlighted different lines from it. Celeste had grown upset after seeing social media posts that tagged Burke with Asia Collins, an LA-based influencer.
Popped up. Somebody that I was wondering if they were going to testify at this preliminary hearing, somebody that we knew was a purported associate or friend of David, somebody who created some social media video in anticipation of this case, and that is Asia Collins. We never really understood what her connection or role was to this. We sure did get a lot more information today about Asia Collins, didn't we?
We did, Jesse. Turns out Asia Collins, who is an LA-based influencer, social media model, she's got a presence and a platform online. Turns out it was her association with David and their rumored friendship, or perhaps early stages of dating, that made Celeste incredibly upset. And that is what Celeste cites as the source of her anger when she is threatening David and telling him over text the night before he sent the Uber to pick her up and deliver her to his home. She tells him over text that she's going to, quote, mutilate his. She tells him that she doesn't want to see one more instance of David being tagged in posts with Asia Collins. Asia did come out on the record and state publicly, after the charges were filed against David, that she never dated him. She also came out and says she wants justice for Celeste. Now, we don't know if she...
According to testimony, Celeste threatened over text to contact his mother, Colleen Burke, and his business associates, and to expose damaging information about him.
Now, then on cross-examination, Blair Burke was questioning LAPD Detective Corey Farrell, and she asked to show the court additional messages from that same conversation. That's where we started to get a little bit more color about the argument that has been referenced previously in the prosecution's charging documents. This is where we actually saw text messages from Celeste to David threatening him. Let me paraphrase for you some of this. In those messages that were shown to the court, that Detective Farrell read to us, Celeste tells David that she's going to ruin his career. She tells him that she's going to tell her father lies about him. She tells him that she has contact information for his business associates and for his mother. She tells him that she's going to call his mother, Colleen Burke, and tell her damaging information about David. Now, we previously have not seen these messages. We didn't really have a sense of exactly what was said in the argument between David and Celeste leading up to the night of April 23rd, when she allegedly died at his hands. So hearing this now and seeing all of this actually in print on the overhead monitor in the courtroom, it adds a little bit more color and life to this.
She initially demanded to see him in person. He told her he didn't have time, citing an upcoming trip. She pushed, and he eventually agreed, arranging an Uber that picked her up in Lake Elsinore and dropped her at his Hollywood Hills home just after 10 p.m. on April 23rd,
Text message
2025.
conversations we were just parsing through in the courtroom that Celeste was actually the one who demanded she and David have this meeting on the evening of April 23rd. She was the one who pushed him to have an in-person conversation. They were fighting about whether he was dating somebody else. She became very upset after seeing social media posts featuring the two of them. And it sounds like that was what triggered this argument. So she demands to see him. He tells her no. He's getting ready for a trip to Singapore. He says his parents are there visiting. He doesn't have time. She demands to see him. And finally, he gives in. So we previously did not know that about this argument. We thought that he arranged it.
Well, he did get her the Uber, right?
She texted him when she arrived, asking to be let
we were
in.
talking during this lunchtime break. There's still some more arguments that are happening. At the time we're recording this, the judge hasn't made the decision about whether or not this is going to go to trial or not. I am made of questions regarding what happened this morning, because I'm starting to see potential holes in the prosecution's case, which I want to get to. So, Julie, good to see you. Let me just start here. We had LAPD Detective Corey Farrell back on the stand, talking about this plethora of text messages between David and Celeste. Thousands of messages. This is something that we were waiting to see. Talked about it on Friday, the images, the text messages. But today, he talked about the conversation leading up to April 23rd, when prosecutors claim David killed Celeste. Talk to me about what those conversations were.
This was so fascinating to me, Jesse, because opposing counsel here, the prosecution and the defense, they're presenting the exact same digital evidence here. They're presenting the same text message conversation between David and Celeste. And based on what these different attorneys are essentially cherry picking from these conversations, we are getting a very different view of what happened between the two of them and what was said the night before Celeste was allegedly killed. Now, first we heard from Beth Silverman, deputy DA prosecuting this case. When she had this LAPD detective, Corey Farrell, on the stand, they presented select text messages from hundreds, thousands of messages between the two during these 2 or 3 nights. And they were meant to basically just establish time, location, the two of them arguing, the two of them coordinating when and where to meet up, the two of them deciding on a pickup location for the Uber, and then Celeste alerting David when she apparently got into his home just after 10 o'clock in the evening on April 23rd, 2025, and asking him to let her in. So very basic facts there, just establishing the two of them were communicating, they were planning on meeting up, and Celeste said in her text message to David that she had arrived. Now,
that is the last confirmed communication from Celeste Rivas Hernandez. What happened inside that house has no camera record. The home's security system had overwritten itself by the time investigators tried to pull footage months after the fact. There simply was no
at a
video
later
left.
Date. But to your point too, Jesse, about that surveillance footage or lack thereof, absolutely. I mean, there is irrefutable hard evidence for so many other things, right? Phone records, Tesla records, text messages that spell out what people were saying and doing at specific times. There is no surveillance footage actually showing David or Celeste going into or coming out of the Doheny Place home where he was staying at the time. The LAPD detective, Corey Farrell, the final witness for the prosecution during this preliminary hearing, he spoke to that today. And he laid out what I thought was a very reasonable explanation. He says by the time they tried to access that security system to search for that video, it had been so long, it had been months, and the system simply overwrote itself. It wasn't stored there anymore. Now, we don't know if somebody may have gone back and deleted that. We don't know if the cameras may have been turned off during that time.
The Uber driver who picked her up told police he had no memory of the trip and couldn't confirm the pickup or drop
Hearing,
off.
are we going to hear from that Uber driver at any point? We've heard about that piece of the investigation for months now, that an Uber picked up Celeste in Lake Elsinore, where her family lives, and then dropped her off at David's home, just about 80 miles away in the Hollywood Hills. We haven't heard from this Uber driver yet. Well, that came up today in court. Apparently, LAPD did interview that Uber driver, and he denies having any recollection of that trip. He cannot definitively confirm that he dropped her off at that time, just after 10 p.m. that night, and he does not remember picking her up or driving her there. That is absolutely...
Those gaps became central to the defense's argument this week, and defense attorney Marilyn Bednarski used her closing statement to lay out what she called 5 problems with the prosecution's case, arguing the evidence supported concealment and transportation of a body, not proof of murder itself.
So what we just heard from the defense before breaking for lunch, defense attorney Marilyn Bednarski was laying out 5 issues that she has with the prosecution's case. Essentially, she is alleging they don't have any evidence proving murder. She says they only have evidence that can support concealment and transportation of a body. They also spent quite a bit of time attacking the 3 special circumstances surrounding that first.
The medical examiner's testimony added more uncertainty than the prosecution may have wanted. Celeste died from one of 2 penetrating wounds, either of which could have killed her within minutes or up to an hour. But decomposition made it impossible to say which wound came first or what weapon caused them. Her body may have been dead for weeks or months before it was discovered, which is part of why the autopsy findings took so long to finalize.
That's right. I mean, he testified the other day, either one of those 2 penetrating wounds that they attributed her death to, either one could kill somebody in, quote, minutes to an hour. That is a pretty wide window of time. And he simply can't say, and that's because of the advanced state of decomposition. She may have been dead for weeks to months before her body was found. We saw in very graphic imagery exactly what her body looked like when the pieces were found in body bags inside that vehicle. So he can't say which penetrating wound happened first. It took them about 3 months just to finalize their autopsy findings and confirm her cause of death. So he doesn't know what kind of instrument or weapon caused those injuries. The body goes through a lot of change post-mortem.
Sure.
So
Then came the phone and vehicle data. Testimony established that Burke's phone and his Tesla left the Hollywood Hills home together at roughly 11:30 p.m. about 90 minutes after Celeste arrived, and traveled north toward Lake Cachuma, stopping briefly at a supercharger station along the way. Photographs from the car's infotainment system were shown to the court as evidence of that route. Months later, Celeste's passport card turned up near Lake Cachuma.
That's right. It came up again. This was from testimony that another LAPD expert spoke to a couple days ago last week during the first few days of this preliminary hearing. And in short, what that testimony established was that David's phone and David's Tesla were moving in the same place at the same time the night that Celeste was allegedly killed. So that came up again today, and they reminded the courts that as part of the prosecution's case, they found David's vehicle and his phone left his Hollywood Hills home at about 11:30 p.m., so about an hour and a half after Celeste arrived at that home, and then headed up to Lake Cachuma. Now, he went further north than that to charge his Tesla. It stopped at a supercharger location, and there were photos shown to the court today as part of the People's Exhibit of the infotainment system in David's Tesla. So that tracks, I think, without a lot of room for doubt, where the vehicle was. There's still a question as to whether there's any surveillance footage that shows David inside the car. Defense obviously pointed that out the other day. There's nothing so far that places the defendant definitively inside his car as it's moving away from the house up to Lake Kachuma, where the victim's passport card was found months later.
Julie, I thought
No footage confirms Burke was inside the vehicle during that drive, something the defense pointed out directly. The defense also pushed toward a self-defense theory, suggesting Celeste had physically confronted Burke that night. Judge O'Mayo struck that line of argument from the record, reminding the court that Celeste is the victim in this case and is not charged with any assault, though she left open the possibility that evidence relating to it could resurface if the case
get a
goes
little
to
bit back into
trial.
what the prosecution was arguing with Detective Farrell, but something else that really stuck out to me, they are mounting, as far as I can see, and I think the court referenced it, a potential self-defense argument. I mean, when I'm reading these messages, there was an aspect to it, and correct me if I'm wrong, did Celeste physically, or are they trying to suggest Celeste physically threatened David, and that perhaps when she got to his house, he acted in self-defense? Am I looking at this completely wrong?
You're not. We've talked about a couple different defenses that attorneys have been, I think, either laying the foundation for or exploring as a potential option if or when this does go to trial. And I think this self-defense argument may be the one they have the strongest foundation for right now. As to the point you're making about physical assaults from Celeste, that was actually stricken from the court record this morning. The judge explained she is the victim here. She is not being charged with assaults. So until this goes to trial and the defense is presenting a...
Prosecutors were direct about one point regardless of what the defense argues about Celeste's age or her family's awareness of the relationship. None of it matters legally. Whether Celeste told Burke she was older, whether her parents knew she spent time with him, whether an aunt or older sister saw them together at a mall or a movie theater, none of that changes the elements of continuous sexual abuse of a minor under 14. Her parents, Jesus and Mercedes, sat through the testimony in court, arriving partway through the morning session on the day closing arguments
were heard. And if I'm reading the notes correctly, did her parents walk in right as this was happening?
So to be clear, Jesse, as you stated, and the prosecution made this very clear in court today, several different ways, it does not matter how old Celeste told David she was. That does not absolve him of these child sexual abuse charges. It does not matter if she lied to him about her age and said she was 18 when she was 13. That does not change the factual substance surrounding that particular charge, sexual abuse of a minor under 14. It also does not matter that her parents consented to letting her travel with him. It also does not matter that her parents, her aunts, her cousins, and apparently her older sister were aware that she spent time with him, went to the mall with him, went to the movies with him. That does not make it okay for him to have sexual relations with this child. So that did come up. And I think that's part of this bigger story, right? We're getting a more colorful picture of what was happening around not only David, but Celeste. Yes, it does seem like, based on the evidence shown to the court today, people around her, including her family, they were aware the two of them spent time together. But beyond that, we don't know if her parents were aware of this purported abortion that happened in January 2024. And let me just remind you, in January 2024, Celeste was still 13 years old. We don't know if her parents were aware that he was instructing her to take Plan B. We don't know if they were aware of who she was with and what they were doing when she ran away from her home in Lake Elsinore at David's prompting. He called that OA. He had a name for those runaway operations. He called them Operation Awesome. He was talking to her over text in records that we've seen. He was talking to her about getting married, starting a family. He told her over text, if you have twins, great, because we wanted 2 kids.
Throughout the hearing, witnesses observed Burke as largely still, occasionally taking notes during the text message testimony, something he had not done earlier in the proceedings, and noticeably more composed than he had appeared days earlier, when testimony covered child sexual abuse material recovered from his phone.
Acting and behaving in court today.
He's so interesting to watch, Jesse, because the responses, the reactions, I think you would expect from somebody in his position. We're not seeing those. I'm sitting at an angle, maybe about 15 to 20 feet behind him, so I can see from the side his facial expressions. He walked in this morning, he was smiling, laughing a little bit, sidebarring with his attorneys. He's been sitting in his usual seat at the end of the counsel table, kind of staring straight ahead for most of today. He did start taking notes. That was something we didn't see during the first 3 days of this preliminary hearing, but he was jotting something down as they were going back and forth talking about the text message conversations. Beyond that, we haven't heard much from him. He's very still. He's not moving much. He's not fidgeting the way that he was on Friday when testimony was dissecting the child sexual abuse material found on his phone. But it's very interesting to observe him. I've had a couple hallway conversations during breaks with the courtroom sketch artist, and she agrees.
Judge Omeo ruled there is sufficient cause to believe Burke committed all 3 charged offenses and ordered the case to trial. It is a low legal bar, probable cause, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But it is the bar that decides whether a case moves forward at all. Bail was denied. Burke's arraignment on the formal charges was scheduled for August 31st at 8:30 a.m.
I really, really appreciate it.
So after I finished up with Julia, this is what came out of court. The judge found that there is sufficient cause to believe the defendant is guilty and to move this trial on all 3 counts, talking about how such a low standard it is. The judge reminded this is an exceedingly low standard, sufficient cause to hold someone to answer, again, probable cause. Apparently David was staring straight ahead at the judge with his arms folded in front of him as she was reading this case, the law notes, court decisions. So yes, the judge found that there's sufficient probable cause. This is going to move forward, and it appears that an arraignment on these charges is going to be held on Monday, August 31st at 8:30 a.m. Bail has been denied, and there was also reporting from Julia that David was nodding rapidly as his attorney was whispering to him before waiving the
Afterward, Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hawkman addressed reporters outside the courthouse. He confirmed his office presented only a small fraction of its total evidence at the preliminary hearing and said additional material, witness testimony, records, and other evidence not admissible under hearsay rules at this stage will be introduced at trial. He also confirmed that prosecutors have not yet decided whether they will seek the death penalty, a determination that remains under review.
60 days out or whenever they want this trial, we will be ready for that trial. So at this point, again, we don't have the one additional consideration is that Mr. Burke now is eligible for death penalty. The death penalty considerations are now being weighed. Part of that consideration will be any submission that the defense wants to submit to
the case now moves toward trial, where a jury, not a judge, will have to reach a unanimous verdict on all 3 counts. Whether that surveillance gap, the uncertain Uber driver, and the unresolved order of Celeste's fatal injuries hold up as reasonable doubt, or simply as holes the prosecution fills in later, is the question this case is now built around.